Let's recap what we know about the cell so far. So this is what you should have learned about the cell in your undergrad degree. So let's go down memory lane. Okay, firstly, we are going to look at the structure of a plant and an animal cell as seen under a light microscope. We will then move on to look at the structure of an animal cell as seen under the electron microscope, and then the structure of a plant cell as seen under the electron microscope. Then we will compare the differences between a plant and an animal cell, and then we will look at the two types of cells, a prokaryotic and a eukaryotic cell. What are the differences between these two different types of cells? And then we will look at the structure of a prokaryotic cell, and then we will look at the difference between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. So let's take that trip down memory lane. Good afternoon and welcome to the recap for session 2, where we are looking at the structure of plant and animal cells and also at the differences between a plant and an animal cell, which are eukaryotic cells, and we're also going to look at the structure of a prokaryotic cell. Now, for the honors students, these are things that you would have learned in your undergrad degree doing life science. So most of this session is going to be conducted as a series of questions, and you will use your textbook, Campbell, Biology 10th edition, to help you answer the questions that I pose. So, welcome to this recap. This is the Opinionated Science Educator.
Every living organism is made up of cells, from plants to the lowliest worm to the most complex human being. But what is a cell? Well, a cell is a small, self-contained unit within a whole organism. Kind of like a room within a house. It is the smallest unit that can be classified as a living thing. We can think of them as the building blocks of life. So how many cells do you think you have in your body? 1,000? A million? A million? More. We contain around 50 trillion cells. Have a look at your little finger. There's probably about 10 billion cells in there. Now, cells come in all different shapes and sizes. Occasionally, cells can be large enough to be seen by the human eye. For example, the yolk of a chicken egg is actually a single cell, and some cells are really long, such as a nerve cell that runs the entire length of your spine. However, most cells are really, really tiny and can only be seen under a microscope. They are so tiny that you could fit about 10 of them across one of your hairs. Now, there are many different types of cells, and each cell carries out its own jobs. Some of these jobs are common to all cells, such as making proteins and producing energy, while some jobs are specific to the type of cell. A human sperm cell has to be able to swim, while the cells that produce a peacock's tail must produce beautiful coloured pigments. Sometimes cells can exist on their own, such as a simple bacterium or a single-celled organism called an amoeba. But mostly, cells work together to form more complex multicellular organisms, such as animals, plants, and insects. In a multicellular organism, as well as doing its own jobs, each cell also works together with the other cells around it to carry out an overall job. For example, the cells of the heart work together to pump blood around your body. So, cells come in all shapes and forms and have all sorts of jobs, but they are all fundamental building blocks of living organisms.
So basically, what was shown in the video, I'm going to summarize now. So cells, the word comes from the Latin word cella, which means small room. Cells are described as the building blocks of life because they are the smallest units of life that are used to build the bodies of all living organisms, be it plants, animals, fungi, or protists. Now, in biology, cell theory is the scientific theory that states living organisms are made up of cells, that cells are the basic structural or organizational unit of all organisms, and that all cells come from pre-existing cells. So basically, cells are the basic unit of structure in all organisms, and they are also the basic unit of reproduction. Now, there is no doubt that the invention of the compound light microscope, or the microscope, enabled biologists to investigate the structure of cells. So from the first time when Robert Hooke identified cells and named cells, the invention of the microscope allowed biologists to look at the structure of plant and animal cells in more detail for the first time.
One of the great things about science is that when scientists make a discovery, it's not always in a prescribed manner, as in only in a laboratory under strict settings with white lab coats and all sorts of neat science gizmos that go beep. In reality, the events and people involved in some of the major scientific discoveries are as weird and varied as they get. My case in point, the weird history of the cell theory. There are 3 parts to the cell theory. 1. All organisms are composed of 1 or more cells. 2. The cell is the basic unit of structure and organization in organisms. And 3. All cells come from pre-existing cells. To be honest, this all sounds incredibly boring until you dig a little deeper into how the world of microscopic organisms and this theory came to be. It all started in the early 1600s in the Netherlands, where a spectacle maker named Zacharias Janssen is said to have come up with the first compound microscope, along with the first telescope. Both claims are often disputed, as apparently he wasn't the only bored guy with a ton of glass lenses to play with at the time. Despite this, the microscope soon became a hot item that every naturalist or scientist at the time wanted to play with, making it much like the iPad of its day. One such person was a fellow Dutchman by the name of Anton van Leeuwenhoek, who heard about these microscope doohickeys, and instead of going out and buying one, he decided to make his own. And it was a strange little contraption indeed, as it looked more like a tiny paddle the size of a sunglass lens. If he had stuck 2 together, it probably would have made a wicked set of sunglasses that you couldn't see much out of. Anywho, once Leeuwenhoek had his microscope ready, he went to town looking at anything and everything he could with them, including the gunk on his teeth. Yes, you heard right. He actually discovered bacteria by looking at dental scrapings, which, when you keep in mind that people didn't brush their teeth much, if at all, back then, he must have had a lovely bunch of bacteria to look at. When he wrote about his discovery, he didn't call them bacteria as we know them today, but he called them animalcules because they looked like little animals to him. While Leeuwenhoek was staring at his teeth gunk, he was also sending letters to a scientific colleague in England by the name of Robert Hooke. Hooke was a guy who really loved all aspects of science, so he dabbled in a little bit of everything, including physics, chemistry, and biology. Thus it is Hooke who we can thank for the term the cell, as he was looking at a piece of cork under his microscope, and the little chambers he saw reminded him of cells, or the rooms monks slept in their monasteries. Think college dorm rooms, but without the TVs, computers, and really annoying roommates. Hooke was something of an underappreciated scientist of his day, something he brought upon himself as he made the mistake of locking horns with one of the most famous scientists ever, Sir Isaac Newton. Remember when I said Hooke dabbled in many different fields? Well, after Newton published a groundbreaking book on how planets move due to gravity, Hooke made the claim that Newton had been inspired by Hooke's work in physics. Newton, to say the least, did not like that, which sparked a tense relationship between the two that lasted even after Hooke died, as quite a bit of Hooke's research, as well as his only portrait, was misplaced due to Newton. Much of it was rediscovered, thankfully, after Newton's time, but not his portrait, as sadly no one knows what Robert Hooke looked like. Fast forward to the 1800s, where two German scientists discovered something that today we might find rather obvious, but helped tie together what we now know as the cell theory. The first scientist was Matthias Schleiden, a botanist who liked to study plants under a microscope. From his years of studying different plant species, it finally dawned on him that every single plant he had looked at were all made of cells. At the same time, on the other end of Germany was Theodor Schwann, a scientist who not only studied slides of animal cells under the microscope and got a special type of nerve cell named after him, but also invented rebreathers for firefighters and had a kickin' pair of sideburns. After studying animal cells for a while, he too came to the conclusion that all animals were made of cells. Immediately, he reached out via snail mail, as Twitter had yet to be invented, to other scientists working in the same field, and it was Schleiden who got back to him, and the two started working on the beginnings of the cell theory. A bone of contention arose between them, as for the last part of the cell theory, that cells come from pre-existing cells, Schleiden didn't exactly subscribe to that thought, as he swore cells came from free cell formation, where they just kind of spontaneously crystallized into existence. That's when another scientist, named Rudolf Virchow, stepped in with research showing that cells did come from other cells. Research that was actually, how to put it, borrowed without permission from a Jewish scientist by the name of Robert Remak, which led to two more feuding scientists. Thus, from teeth gunk to torquing off Newton, crystallization to Schwann cells, the cell theory came to be an important part of biology today. Some things we know about science today may seem boring, but how we came to know them is incredibly fascinating. So if something bores you, dig deeper. It's probably got a really weird story behind it somewhere.
Now, these are the types of cells that Matthias Schleiden would have seen under his microscope. And if you prepare a wet mound, for example, of an onion or epidermis of a plant cell, this is what you will see under the light microscope. So these are examples of plant cells as seen under the light microscope. Now, Theodor Schwann would have seen cells similar to this if he'd taken a cheek, cells from the lining of his cheek or other cells and looking at other animal cells. So these are the animal cells. Now, what parts of the plant and animal cells can be seen under the light microscope? And can you see the differences in the shape between the two types of cells? Describe the differences and provide reasons for this difference. So, this is what you need to do, and I think this is a good point to pause the video so that you can answer these questions.